In Montreal North, a pregnant woman is stabbed repeatedly. Her 8-month-old baby dies in hospital. This is not an isolated case. It is one that is gaining more attention across Canada since Canadian law considers fetuses inside the womb not legal victims. Is it justice? Should an attacker face charges for the death of a fetus inside a woman's body? Joining us in the discussion, defense lawyer and former prosecutor Andrew Barbacki. So I want to begin in generalities here. If a fetus is involved in a death, even if it is 8 or 9 months along, is there any kind of charges that an attacker could face at this point in Canada?
Yes, the criminal code is pretty clear that injuries inflicted on what meets the definition of child inside the womb, if it's subsequently born alive.
But if it wasn't?
If it's at the stage of being what's qualified as likely to be born alive,
okay.
It's defined as a child, and injuries which are inflicted which cause it to die before birth, would qualify as a human being.
In this case, we just found out today that the baby was delivered by C-section and that it did live. We don't know how long the baby lived for, but it did live. So what kind of charges now could a suspect face?
Well, look, you know, speaking about an actual case where we don't have the full facts, I really can't make a comment on a specific case.
So let's do a hypothetical. A baby is born by C-section, lives for a few minutes, and then passes away. What kind of charges could be aligned then?
Hypothetically, it can be a murder charge.
Okay.
The only problem is the definition in the criminal code says that a child becomes a human being when it is completely outside the mother's body, whether or not the umbilical cord is severed, whether it breathes, and whether it has independent circulation. So that as soon as it proceeds outside the body and is alive, it is at that point a human being.
So we could see, in a case like this, hypothetically, a murder charge.
It wouldn't be surprising, depending on what the medical facts are, what the condition of the fetus was.
How do other countries deal with this kind of issue? Are most aligned with Canada? Are countries different in how they handle it?
I couldn't really comment too much on other countries, but our Supreme Court, in terms of determining when a fetus becomes a child, they talk about a likelihood of being born alive, which is around the 7-month period.
Okay, because if you are going to try to change that, as some advocates are trying to, then it becomes a very slippery slope, doesn't it?
Right, and you get into an interplay between the law and medical facts, and it becomes quite complicated.
To change the criminal code in this instance, how difficult would that be to try to alter how far along a fetus is before it is considered potentially eligible to live?
Right, well, you know, the article in question hasn't been changed in spite of all the years going by. What we have is a judicial interpretation. There's a Supreme Court case that's fairly recent which talks about at what point, because the criminal code never mentions the word fetus. They talk about a child inside the womb. So the child definition is one that's by common law. It's a judge-made interpretation. So the Supreme Court, in a case that's very difficult to pronounce, so I won't try. But within the last 10 or 15 years, they defined a child in the womb as becoming a child at the point in time where it is likely to survive birth.
A pretty divisive issue, isn't it?
It is. You know, where do you draw a line? It's not something, I don't think, which is possible to make a very clear distinction between a fetus and a child and being viable, and how do you assess the likelihood of being born alive. That becomes a very complicated issue.
Thank you very much for coming in to share your thoughts.
It's always a pleasure.